Right. One of my focuses in this project was to create a way of working with computers so the human element comes to the forefront. Ready?
Rolling.
Whilst retaining like an electronic outcome. I want to make electronic music. I don't just want to go and make pure jazz or pure classical or world music or percussion. I mean, I wanted to make electronic music. I wanted to have all the frequency spectrum, the interesting ideas, using sampling, making these incredible textures, and I wanted to do it in a way that using computers and electronic mediums don't change the way, as a human, I would compose or play. That was the primary goal of Remix Experiment, was to make the computers follow me and play thinking only of the energy and the timing and the musical decisions as I would normally if I was playing with human beings. I build a lot of drums because I like, just like with my electronic sounds, you know, I basically like to experiment, and I grew up playing junk percussion and building a lot of things because I, first didn't have heaps of money and I wanted to play a different kind of drum, so I used to just dream things up and take a lot of pieces and experiment. One of my favorite sounds I recorded on the album is just this. Inside here I've just got a whole bunch of screws and bits and pieces. I also used a lot of like this thing here, had one of the percussion pieces I had, I just made my own skin using tape. I played jerry cans and made even my own cymbals out of weird metal. It's the same that an electronic engineer would get in a synth and they'd soundsmith something and they'd EQ something and they'd play. They wouldn't just leave a sound raw. Well, I think the same thing with my drumming. I pick up a cymbal and then I'm like, yeah, well, it's a cymbal. Now what do I want to do with it? What kind of sounds do I want? And rather than just do everything in post, try to achieve those sounds acoustically and play them. That changes my playing, so I get these fast little short sounds, and yeah, that's been a really fun part of the album. My mouth is like my third arm, it's my fifth extra limb, because I've got my legs and my arms going full pace. So I'm speaking into a microphone. The microphone, the things that I'm speaking are kind of not words and they're not melodies. It's more like rhythms and or kind of air. And as I'm doing that, my computer is recognizing my voice, and all the other drums and PA sounds and crowds and stuff it ignores. So it hones in on one particular part of my voice. Then from there it turns that into MIDI, and from those MIDI notes it goes into a whole series of commands and takes like those MIDI notes and spreads them out across the whole track. When you're in front of an audience, the decisions that you make are really, really important to the gig and to keeping the music alive. And when you're looking at the audience and the audience is looking at you, that's purely where I think a performer's focus should be for me. And using a laptop, say, or a computer screen, when you ever see someone perform, they're constantly looking down or looking into something that you can't see, and it's taking away from the experience as a viewer, as a listener. So I really wanted to have that in Remix Experiment, a way that I didn't need to look away from the audience. I didn't need to see my screens, well, as little as possible. And that's where, out of all of the research I did, I came back to a microphone being the primary thing. The second thing I decided to do was, rather than use long periods of sampling, because I love sampling and I grew up with hip hop, I used a lot of old sounds, and instead of cutting them into longer samples, put them into one-shots. And those one-shots allow me to construct the timing. So my music moves in a sequence, and that sequence is either random or it moves one step at a time, one note at a time, one beat at a time. And that allows me to determine how long, how fast, and in what time signature. And that makes me feel like I'm playing with, not with a computer, with people. It makes me feel like I'm playing some sort of electronic jazz. You know, I used to have about $50 a week when I was studying at university, and I used to just go and dig in a store and just, you know, pull out a cover that I thought, oh, this is cool, you know, and I'd be like, wow, you know, who's Monk? I don't know who that is. And then I'd just go, you know, spend $7 or $8 or whatever it was, and then I'd go home and put it on and just listen and go, oh, wow. And that would be my album of the week. And I did that every week, you know, growing up in Sydney, and that's how I learned. That's how I heard about Indian music. That's how I learned about jazz. That's why I'm so happy the album's actually going to make it to vinyl, because I've never actually made a vinyl before, you know, ever. So it's going to be my first record after, you know, 20 plus years of making music that's going to go to vinyl, so that's cool. Alright, everyone's rolling still? Yep. Here we go. listening to people play in the moment. And the hardest thing to do with electronics, because everything you feel is predetermined, it's been pre-written, you know, and you have to do a lot of work to make your electronic set truly sort of organic. I worked super hard to give the computer a personality, and each different song has a different degree of this. It will turn on randomly. I will never know when it'll turn on. And in that track is a whole bunch of samples. I've either made them or found them. All these layers of probability, and then I'll have a chordal sequence or a melodic sequence that goes every time I make a note, and I can control the length of the note with my breath. So it's like an instrument. I've designed a probability monster instrument, and each different kind of player in my virtual band has a personality. One of the coolest things was when we did the sessions at Hydrofunk and here in the studio at my house, I'd do a pass and I'd play well and I was happy with the drumming, but the computer didn't play well. The track wasn't good. And I thought that was really cool, even though it was frustrating. There's nothing I could do about it. I'd successfully made such randomization coming out of my machines that sometimes they just sucked. And on the flip side of that, when we both got it right, it's a never to be repeated awesome take that we captured. Keeps it fresh, and it means I gotta not get attached to it and follow the direct concept, which is to play organic electronic music. I've always wanted to trigger things using my arms and my hands, but it's just not the way to go, because my beats and my playing is so frenetic and all my concentration is going into my arms. So when I first wanted to do this, I worked with my buddy Makina, who's designs software and also hardware. And I originally had wires coming out of my shoes and microphones in the bottom, potentiometers and accelerometers, so many little things you can get to trigger any kind of information. In this particular case, it was quite complex because I had to use an accelerometer in this little circuit board, but what was really complex is getting rid of the wires. This is wireless. It's designed its own language that's talking to my computers. There's no latency, so in real time it's triggering the stomp of my foot to my computer with enough time that I can be musical, and that's milliseconds, like milliseconds accurate. So even though it's like strapped to my shoe using a rubber band, which is not the final way I will have this, right now it's working. when I first started making electronic music, and I've been doing it for a long time. I mean, I remember getting a computer like in the 80s.
Outer space! But that's just the beginning! Beat the computer with the numbers game! Or even compose a symphony!
Since computers and electronic music has thrived in the last 2 decades, I think people hear rhythm differently. And something that's happened very slowly and naturally, and it's not a bad thing, it's just an interesting thing. Things weren't copy and pasted because we didn't do that. By using that as our tool, it changes the way we compose. Not only that, it changes the way people listen to rhythm, and they've developed a taste for computers, which is an extension of how they are in our world anyway. But in terms of being a musician, it's fascinating how electronic music and BPMs and click tracks and grids has changed the way people perceive rhythm. I quite love process, and I think very few people get to see into an artist's process. In this day and age, I think doing something truly new and interesting really engages people's minds, because we're in this constant flux of technology and music is changing every year. And the way we hear music is changing. The way we distribute music is changing. The devices we listen to music is changing. It's just all moving. I called it Remix Experiment because it was remixing all the music that I grew up and love, and everything I heard, when I was a kid, just listening to vinyls and cassettes and the radio, which is all I had. There was no internet, and it's a remix of all the different influences that I've received traveling around the world and working with different musicians, and all these styles that I grown up, that's made me who I am. And the experimental part, because I just didn't know if it was going to work. It's scary because you walk out there and your technology doesn't work for a second, and you just go, could be so many things, I don't know why this isn't working. Maybe it's broken, maybe the battery's fallen out, maybe the software was wrong, so you iron out all these kinks through doing it.